All right, let's just dive right into this. Imagine a man who is the ultimate product of a corrupt political machine. I'm talking about a loyal, unquestioning lieutenant to New York's most powerful political boss, a guy who was actually cast out of his government job in utter disgrace. Now, imagine that exact same man suddenly waking up in the middle of the night to discover he's the leader of the free world. Welcome to our explainer on the absolutely astonishing life of Chester A. Arthur. He is living proof that a person's past doesn't always dictate their future, and that sometimes, the most unlikely people step up and do the exact right thing when it counts the most.
To really grasp the sheer shock of Arthur's presidency, we have to plunge right back into the horror of 1881. The beloved president, James A. Garfield, has just died from an assassin's bullet. The great American author Mark Twain actually captured the bleak national mood perfectly, calling Arthur's inauguration the grimmest joke the world has ever seen. The nation was terrified. The fox was now running the henhouse. The ultimate corrupt insider was suddenly taking the oath of office.
The American public was filled with absolute dread. One close friend of Arthur's reportedly just buried his face in his hands when he heard the news, muttering the words you see right there, "Good God." And this really sets the massive stakes for our explainer today. Why was the entire country, even his own friends, so afraid of this man? And how on earth did he completely flip the script?
Section 1. The Idealistic Civil Rights Lawyer. A surprising beginning for a political boss.
So, to understand the politician, we need to flash back to Arthur's youth. Born in 1829 to a fiery, nomadic abolitionist preacher from rural Vermont, young Chester basically learned how to become a social chameleon just to adapt to all these new environments. Which brings us to the core paradox of his life. He didn't start out as a political boss. He was actually a brilliant, deeply idealistic civil rights lawyer in New York City. The values of equality his dad instilled in him, he put those directly into practice. Now, obviously, later on he transforms into this pragmatic, hard-nosed operator for a powerful political machine, but let's look at exactly what he achieved during that early idealistic phase.
Arthur wasn't just all talk. At just 25 years old, in 1854, he represented Elizabeth Jennings, a black schoolteacher who was violently thrown off a segregated streetcar. Arthur built this meticulous case and won, striking a massive blow against institutionalized segregation in New York. 6 years later, he helped win the landmark Lemon slave case, which freed 8 enslaved people who were in transit through New York. And when the Civil War broke out, he served as a quartermaster. And get this, he was renowned for his rigorous honesty, actually rooting out corrupt contractors.
Section 2. The Gentleman Boss. The Descent into the Machine.
Following the Civil War, America entered the Gilded Age, and Arthur was drawn right into the orbit of Senator Roscoe Conkling. Conkling was the boss of the New York Republican machine, a group known as the Stalwarts. But to understand how they operated, we really have to talk about the spoils system. This was the absolute ultimate form of political cronyism. It was an era where politics was less about public service and way more about raw power and patronage. Government jobs were not given to the most qualified people. They were handed out as rewards to loyal party soldiers. And the Stalwarts, they were fighting fiercely to protect this exact system, viewing any civil service reformers as dangerous dreamers.
And here is why that system mattered so much. To put it into perspective, 3/4, nearly 75% of all federal revenue poured directly through the New York Custom House via tariffs. In 1871, Conkling got President Grant to appoint Chester Arthur as the collector of the Port of New York. So Arthur is now overseeing over 1,000 employees, and every single one is a political chip. He became known as the gentleman boss, always flawlessly dressed, highly effective at his duties, but unapologetically using the Custom House as the financial and political engine for Conkling's machine.
But, every boss eventually faces a reckoning. In 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes takes the presidency with a strict mandate for civil service reform, and he targets the most notorious symbol of the spoils system, Arthur's Custom House. An investigation goes in and exposes rampant overstaffing and political maneuvering. Arthur, stubbornly loyal to Conkling, completely refuses to resign. So after this massive political war, President Hayes publicly fires him in 1878. The gentleman boss was publicly humiliated, but ironically, within his own faction, he became a really powerful political martyr.
Section 3. The Assassin's Twisted Gift. Chaos, death, and the ultimate irony. Totally consumed by a quest for political revenge, Conkling and Arthur head to the 1880 Republican National Convention in Chicago, determined to reclaim their power. And what happened there was just absolute chaos. For 36 grueling ballots, the convention was completely deadlocked. Finally, a surprise compromise candidate emerges,
James A. Garfield, who was actually a reformer from a rival faction. To keep the party from completely fracturing, Garfield's team desperately needed a stalwart on the ticket, so they offered the vice presidency to Chester Arthur. Conkling was furious. He strictly ordered Arthur to reject it. But, in a quiet, firm act of defiance, Arthur stood up to his boss for the very first time. He accepted the nomination, and the Garfield-Arthur ticket narrowly won the election.
But just months into the new administration, tragedy strikes. A delusional, failed office seeker named Charles Guiteau shot President Garfield at a train station. As he was being arrested, Guiteau proudly shouted those chilling words, "I am a stalwart. Arthur is president now." In his twisted mind, he actually believed he was a patriot, removing an obstacle so the stalwarts could reclaim their jobs. This is the absolute lowest point of the story. The nation was totally horrified, and Arthur was deeply implicated by the assassin's own unhinged words.
What followed was an agonizing limbo. For 79 long, hot days in the summer of 1881, Garfield basically lingered between life and death, largely because doctors kept probing his wounds with unsterilized fingers. Meanwhile, Arthur hid away in his New York home, terrified and completely politically paralyzed. Finally, on September 19th, Garfield passed away. And at 2:15 a.m. the very next morning, Arthur was sworn in as the 21st President of the United States.
Section 4. The Unlikely Presidential Reformer. Flipping the table on the spoils system.
The moment Arthur took that oath, the immense gravity of the presidency completely transformed him. He realized he was no longer a factional chief. He was the head of state. Conkling immediately descended on the White House with a whole list of demands, totally expecting to run the country by remote control. But Arthur politely, yet firmly, refused. He shocked everyone by keeping Garfield's entire reform-minded cabinet in place to ensure a smooth transition. The Prince of Spoilsmen basically took out a pair of scissors and severed the puppet strings on the spot, infuriating his old boss and stunning a deeply skeptical nation.
And what Arthur did next was nothing short of a revolution. He became the champion of the exact reforms he used to fight against. In 1883, he signs the Pendleton Civil Service Act, outlawing political kickbacks and officially replacing the spoils system with merit-based competitive exams. He also vetoed a massive pork barrel spending bill, fought to lower consumer tariffs, and even vetoed the 20-year Chinese Exclusion Act, calling it an unreasonable violation of treaties. Now, Congress did pressure him into signing a revised 10-year ban, but his initial veto showed a level of conscience that was incredibly rare for that era.
Arthur's incredible foresight extended to the military, too. Back in 1881, the U.S. Navy was a rotting, decaying joke of obsolete wooden sailing vessels. Arthur brilliantly fought a very reluctant Congress to secure funding for modern, steel-hulled steam warships, the famous ABCD cruisers. For this massive commitment, he is still rightly remembered today as the father of the modern U.S. Navy.
But hey, it wasn't all serious policy. Elegant Arthur brought some serious glamour to Washington. He flat out refused to move into the White House until it was totally renovated, literally auctioning off 24 wagon loads of historical furniture, including Abraham Lincoln's pants. He hired the legendary Louis Comfort Tiffany to redecorate, hosted lavish multi-course dinners, and was actually famous for owning 80 pairs of trousers himself. He was the ultimate night owl, rarely starting his workday before late morning. But as we're about to see, those late nights hid a very dark secret.
Section 5. A Tragic, Secret Sacrifice. The Hero's Hidden Burden.
Okay, it's time to recontextualize everything we just learned. Arthur's glittering presidency was actually masking an immense, quiet act of heroism. Just a year into his term in 1882, Arthur received a devastating medical diagnosis. He had Bright's disease. In an age before dialysis, this was a slow, inexorable, and incredibly painful death sentence. He kept it a closely guarded secret known only to a few intimates. So when critics whispered that his late starts and late nights were just signs of a lazy, gilded-age gentleman, they were entirely wrong. He was actually dragging a dying, deeply fatigued body through the immense, crushing duties of the presidency. He reformed the civil service, he rebuilt the Navy, and he stabilized the entire nation, all while fighting a private, agonizing, and losing battle with his own mortality. Knowing his time was running out, Arthur mounted only a very half-hearted re-election bid in 1884. He gracefully and peacefully handed over power to Grover Cleveland in 1885. And then, right before his death from a cerebral hemorrhage in November 1886, at just 57 years old, he burned almost all of his personal correspondence, taking his inner thoughts and his tragic burden right to the grave. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought.
Can a corrupt past forge a principled leader? Chester A. Arthur entered the highest office in the land bathed in total suspicion and tragedy. Yet, when faced with the ultimate test of character, he chose duty over his old allies, the nation over his faction, and principle over personal gain. He proves that for sure, the most unlikely figures in our history can sometimes step up and do the exact right thing when it counts. It really makes you wonder, who else in history's shadows deserves a second look? Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.